Good afternoon to everybody. I am Lorenzo Maraviglia from INVALSI. I have the honor and the responsibility to chair the session, which is about the use of models and methods, mathematical methods to understand and interpret education data. I think this is a very delicate, very sensitive topic because we're talking about school, we're talking about education, and that is one of these contexts, like society in general, where everything interacts with everything. And so we need some structure in the way we look at data. And models, especially mathematical models, can give us this structure. This help to look at data and interpret their content, their meaning. So we have three speeches and 2 hours of time. So I would say 20 minutes. Okay, every speaker can speak up to 20 minutes. I will tell when there are 5 minutes left, and so we can have time to discuss the topic. After every intervention, 10 minutes to make and answer questions. Which in this way we should save some time at the end for a more general discussion in case you want, in case there's a possibility to do it. So okay, I leave the ground to Anna Mergoni.
Okay, so thank you for being here. My presentation is about the relation between school performance and the managerial attitude of school principals. I'm doing a PhD in economics of education at KU Leuven, which is in Belgium, and this is a joint project between KU Leuven, my home university, Politecnico di Milano, and the University of Porto. So with the Politecnico di Milano, we developed the research question and we investigated the data, whereas with the KU Leuven and Porto, we developed more the methodological part. And before I forget, you can ask me a question in Italian at the end. So the scope of economics of education is in general to improve the educational system of a country. But as we learned from the presentation of Christophe yesterday and of Monica this morning, educational poverty, education is including many variables, many indicators, many directions. It means decreasing the dropout, it means increasing knowledge in general, increasing soft skills. So we have to restrict a bit our research question. In our case, we want to see how can we improve the school performance through the channel of the principals. And in particular, we have three research questions. So how much the principal practice and the principal managerial practice can influence the school performance. And then if there is one practice, one activity that is more important than the other, so what is most effective, and what are the interactions, if there are interactions between the action that the principal take. So the evidence from the literature is that the principal have an important role. And therefore, the government all over the world, especially in Australia and the US, they're giving more power and more autonomy to the principals. And these have two consequences. On the one hand, the good principal, the able principal, are able to improve even more the performance of their schools. On the other hand, the principal that have a lack of knowledge don't manage to cope with the higher responsibility and therefore create a gap between different schools and between, in the end, the education of the students, and this goes to increase inequality. So, to see how the principals can affect, and if they affect the school performance, we have a list of questions that first we need to answer. So, what do we mean with school performance? And then, what do we mean with principal practice? And then how do we relate these two measures? And so with school performance, we don't want to measure just the student output in terms of test score, in this case INVALSI test score, but also the behavior. So will they be responsible? And is the school creating a nice environment? And here, the application question. So how do we measure student performance, which is a part of school performance? And how do we measure student behavior? How do we measure the managerial practice? So I will try to answer this question one by one, and then to come back to the original question. So what is the role and the effect of managerial practice of principal on school's performance? So the first question is, how do we measure school performance? The schools include multiple dimensions, and in the graph you can see that you can imagine the dimension of interest are the indicator. And here I plot just one because it's easier to represent, but you can imagine to have many indicators. For example, an indicator is the test score of the student. Another indicator is if they do drop out. Another is that they are happy at school. Okay, so the point in the graph here, it's very hard. But, okay, so the point in the graph represents a school. So a school is characterized by a certain level of test score, certain level of dropout. And the best schools are the school on the frontier. And the performance of the school is assigned in terms of distance to the frontier of the best practice school. So is a performance score relative to the other schools that we have in our sample. So in our case, the sample is Italy. So comparing to the other schools in Italy, who is producing the higher test score, in this case in maths and science, for example. And on the right-hand side, you just see the mathematical formulation of what I explained. So the efficiency, the performance is the distance of the point, the school, to the schools that are able to produce the more, to deliver the highest output. Okay, you might think that this comparison is unfair because schools face different contexts. So if the school is an urban area, suburban area, in the north, in the south, but also if the school has a good principal or if the school has a bad principals or motivated teachers. So we try to make our evaluation fair by including this variable as conditional variable. So we just compare, for example, let's say that the green school are the school with good principals. So we will compare the schools only within the sample of schools with the same color. So schools facing the same characteristics. In the previous case, I talked about standard DEA. In this case, I call this score conditional DEA. And so, to see what is the impact of having these characteristics of being in a school in a certain region, of being in a school with good principal characteristics, we compare the conditional score with the non-conditional score. And how do we do this comparison? We do it through the ratio of the conditional over the unconditional, and then we sum all the difference that we get for the schools in our case in Italy, and then we see what is the impact of having that characteristics for the school performance. And maybe it's interesting to notice that the scores that we obtain are bounded between 0 and 1, where 1 are the schools that perform the best, and 0 are the schools that are not able to obtain any educational outcome. So for the empirical application, we rely on the INVALSI data, and we focus on the third year of lower secondary education. So on the 8th grade of INVALSI data, using the data from 2018-2019. And to do this research, we rely on the national sample of INVALSI, because they have also information about the principal's managerial skills through the principal questionnaire. And so from the student questionnaire, we get the scores, the INVALSI scores in math and English and Italian, and information from the socioeconomic background of the student. Whereas from the principal questionnaire, we retrieve the attitude of the principals. And we categorize the managerial attitude of the principal in 5 categories following the literature. So the first category is monitoring. So if the principal supervises the daily activity of teachers and students. So if he goes in the class and checks that everything is okay, if there is some misconduct, if he acts in first person, for example. So targets instead concern setting clear educational goal for the student and for the teachers. People is how the principal relates to the teachers in terms of maintaining their well-being and promoting like training and their professional development. Operation is the more bureaucratic part related to the principal's job, and leadership is the ability of setting clear role and responsibility among teachers and also students. And also we consider information about the school climate, and we do that through variables related to student behavior, parents' behavior, and teacher behavior. In terms of liking to go to school, being involved in the school, so discipline for students, participation for parents, and encouragement to do more activity from the side of teachers. And in this way, we set 2 empirical models. So in one model, we evaluate the schools in terms of delivering higher score in Italian, English, and maths, considering the socioeconomic background of the student as an input. And in the second model, instead we consider the school climate. So if the school performance in terms of creating a nice environment for learning. So the student behavior, the parent behavior, and the teacher behavior. And also in this case, we consider the socioeconomic background of the student to make sure that the evaluation is fair. And we see how the managerial practice of principal impact these 2 models. Okay, so here we see some descriptive statistics of our variable. It is interesting to notice that the exogenous is relative to the principal managerial practice, and this variable were categorical. So the principal has to answer this question, and were able to answer on a scale between 1 and 4. So that's why you see the min to 1 and the max to 4. Whereas all the other variables were continuous. So the results, in the first element of the first table, 0.73, is the average performance of schools in terms of delivering education, in terms of test score, INVALSI test score in Italian, English, and math. So 0.73 means that the improvement, so the distance of the average school to the best school is 27. So in principle they could improve 27% their performance if they would act as the best school in the sample, so in Italy. Whereas in terms of creating a nice environment for learning, so model 2, 0.65 means that the school could improve by 35% in terms of discipline of students, participation of teachers and parents, and to collaborate to create knowledge for the students. So in the table, in the box plot below, we see the impact of the managerial practice of principal on the performance of the school. So in both cases, we see that the most important variables is people. So how the principal relates with the teachers and with the students. Interesting also, the effect of principal on the school climate is much higher than the impact of the principal on students' direct students' test score. And this is understandable because it's probably actually the channel through which the principal can impact the test score of the student is through the creation of a nice environment for learning. And also because maybe the student can directly learn from the principal, from the behavior of the principal discipline, but they cannot learn directly from the principal how to be good at maths or English or Italian. So in this graph we see the interaction effect of the managerial practice. So what we see is that the highest a point is in this graph, the most impact has on the school performance. And in this case we see that the highest impact is when we have a combination of two managerial practice. So that's the principal. If the principal focus just on one, well, they can improve their impact if they focus on two. But as long as they try to be good at everything, they appears from our analysis is that they fail, because maybe there is a waste of resources, so they are not able to actually focus in anything by trying to reach the student through all the managerial channels. And from the interaction study, we see that the most impactful interaction in terms of student test score are the targeting, so targeting of educational objective, and people, so managing the teachers, basically pushing teachers to have more training, for example. And instead, in terms of school climate, so creating a nice environment for learning, we have that the most impactful and important combination is monitoring the students, and there is a mistake, it's not 4, it's 5, and leadership. So actually it's really the example of the principals to the students to give them good practice in terms of behavior. And so if in this graph we see again the impact, one variable per time, of the managerial practice on the school performance, and you see that there is a slightly increasing but still positive line. So a positive coefficient of this line means that the more the principals do this practice, the more and the positive the effect of this practice on. I made it with a confusing word maybe. So the positive coefficients means that the practice has a positive effect on the school performance. And it's interesting to see that the first practice, monitoring, has this inverse U shape. So it means that if the principal focus too much on monitoring, at the end, if they exaggerate, they're not getting a positive feedback in terms of school performance. So it's good to focus in each of these practice, but if you focus too much, maybe because the student and the teachers start to feel a pressure, or maybe because focusing too much on one variable doesn't allow you to focus also on the other. We don't know what is going on there, but what we see is that indeed there is a decrease in performance. And this is true both in terms of student test score and also in terms of learning environment of the school. In this case, we see the learning environment of the schools. So to conclude, what we did in the paper was to study the impact of managerial practice of principal on school performance. School performance is in terms of students' test score, INVALSI, and learning environment. And so to do so, we developed this measure to see the impacts of the managerial practice on the school performance. And the results can be summarized in 3 points. The first takeaway is that the principals have an important role in both considering school performance in terms of test score and environment for learning. The second takeaway is that the most important practice and action for both models is the ability of dealing with people. And in terms of interactions, the most impactful is the combination of two practice, and in particular, targeting and people, if we want to maximize the student outcome in terms of test score. And if we want to maximize the environment for learning, then the action are monitoring and leadership. Thank you for your attention.